Today I'd like to weigh in on the COVID-19, otherwise known as coronavirus pandemic, but I'd like to do it through the lens of my Catholic faith. You know, as Catholics, we're supposed to live our faith based on reason, enlightened by faith. Today I want to focus on the latter, but before I do, just to touch base on the reason part of it. First, I want to say right out front, I'm not going to pretend I know anything more than any one of you who are following basically this pandemic and what the CDC or World Health Organization is talking about. So I'm not going to pretend I'm no expert or know anything more about that. I'm just like a lot of you who are pretty much still in the dark about this whole thing because it's just so new. But considering all this ongoing developments going on, it is reasonable to be, number one, worried and even scared. However, reason tells me three things. First, don't fall for all the fear-mongering that the media is putting out there. The media loves to use human tragedy to, number one, increase ratings by instilling fear into people, and two, by promoting their leftist agendas out there, which really makes them like pawns to Satan and his minions. It's like Rahm Emanuel, the Chicago mayor, once said. He said, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." You know, and that's what we're getting from the media today. So don't fall for the fear-mongering, okay? You know, Satan and his minions' most strongest and effective means to win our souls is through our emotions. It's through our emotions. They know to attack the amygdala part of our brain, that part that controls fear and anxiety. They know that. Number two, don't downplay the reality of this virus like so many people are doing. You know, I'm not going to be like the deputy health minister, the government official of Iran, who on public TV was downplaying the virus, and at the same time he was doing that, he was shown wiping his forehead from perspiration, from sweating. After all that downplaying, he was also on TV again on interviews, also downplaying the coronavirus, and then shortly thereafter he died. At that time, he had already contracted the disease, and he died from the coronavirus. So I'm not going to be like him and downplay this. Now, I've heard a lot of people talking about using reason by taking the death tolls of the flu and the present death tolls of the coronavirus now, and comparing the two. Just yesterday, I listened to Dennis Prager on his Fire Chat episode. Dennis Prager is a guy I highly admire because he's one of these guys that are really steep in reason. He's a very reasonable guy, okay? A lot of the things that he says just make sense to me. I learn a lot from this guy, but I sat there and I heard him make that comparison between the two numbers of the death tolls there.
There's a tremendous amount of non-rationality here. Let me give you an example. As of this moment, of course, this could change and I can end up wrong on this issue. I fully acknowledge that. However, as of this moment, 30 Americans have died of the coronavirus. Maybe by the time you see this, in a day or two, or next week, whenever you watch it, it may be more than that, but it's 30. Now, do you know the number of Americans that have died this season? And it's not over the flu season. This season from the flu. According to the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control in the United States, approximately 34,000 Americans have died of the flu. Last year, over 50,000 Americans, according to the CDC, died of the flu. Why was there no panic over that? I don't think you have a very good answer to that question. I don't think anybody does. That's a lot of people, right? And hundreds and hundreds of thousands were infected by it. Millions, in fact, excuse me, millions, tens of millions were affected by the flu. So why wasn't the media giving us numbers about dead from the flu this year and last year and the year before? I've never gotten a coherent answer. Why are we getting numbers on the coronavirus but not numbers on the flu when the numbers are so much greater?
So Dennis makes a good point there. Okay, one that we should take into consideration. However, there is just so much unknown right now. There's just too much unknown to just be so conclusive for anybody to conclusively just dismiss this virus, to downplay it. Now, the third thing that reason tells me is to basically use reason, take what the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, and the World Health Organization, take their information. I'll put a link below in the descriptions for their for the CDC's website. It's a great website. I follow it, and that's where I'm learning about this, and I'm recommending those out you, instead of just going by hearsay and whatnot, learn about this, because it is a real thing. It's real, okay? When you look at it, you'll know it's real, and it's most likely, more people, even here in the United States, will contract it. But the specialists in these fields are throwing out numbers that indicate that even most people will eventually contract this disease. So where are we at right now? As I'm recording this, the CDC's website, so they show right now at a glance the total cases right now in the United States. Now, obviously there's a lot more throughout the world, especially in China and Europe, in Italy. But here in America, there are right now 1,629 reported cases. Of that, 41 deaths. And of that, 46 states, including the District of Columbia, so 47 areas in the United States that is reporting cases of COVID-19 coronavirus. That's where we're at right now. So those are the three things that reason speaks out to me about regarding this so far. Now, it's not good to just camp out in the realm of reason either, because sometimes reason could lead us down the wrong path. Okay, we need that second half. We need to have our reason enlightened by faith, our Catholic faith. You know, to segue into this topic about the faith part of this, I want to share with you something that I learned from the Catholics in Louisiana, okay, this past summer. Now, I went to a traditional Latin Mass in Lafayette. And at that Mass, they had a prayer specifically for the protection against hurricanes. It was a prayer that was specifically for asking for protection in the hurricanes, because if you go, the hurricane season in Louisiana is beginning of June through the end of November. So if you were to go to attend Mass there, I think it's in every church here, but at least in the Latin Mass that I went to in Lafayette, they had that there. And it struck me, because here we are, because the hurricanes are a disaster. And of all people, the people of New Orleans, the area, they know. They've experienced. They've gone through Hurricane Katrina, okay? And yet what do? Okay, they turn to their faith in God, for the protection against something so disastrous, okay? And what are we dealing with now? Something potentially could be disastrous here in America. It's already a disaster throughout the world, but right now, this thing is still moving, it's still growing. So that is why we need to apply faith to illuminate our reasoning and to help us make decisions regarding this coronavirus thing. Faith. That's what the people in Louisiana taught me. And the key to their faith was manifested in the form of prayer. And it was at prayer at the Mass. They invoked Our Lady of Succor and Saint Scholastica. There's various prayers out there that invokes them and asks God for the protection against hurricanes. Now, I even ran into one of a collect. I came across one of the collect of a Mass there that for the aversion of hurricanes. So that is key there, that their faith was manifested in prayer. And that's something I learned. That's something that we should be thinking about right now. And what is prayer? What is the highest form of prayer? Sure, we should pray. Everybody should be praying. I'm hearing good priests and everybody recommending pray the rosary, pray the divine chaplet, pray this, pray that. We should pray, but let's remember, let's not forget, the highest form of prayer is the holy sacrifice of the Mass. That is the highest form of prayer. It is the source and summit of our faith, the holy sacrifice of the Mass. This is why it really shocked me when I learned when Rome temporarily put a stop to masses, to public masses, to the sacrament of the Eucharist. Not even only that, but they even put a stop to confessions. Shortly after that, then you have other parts of the world where bishops are doing the same thing. Here in the United States, we have the archdioceses of Seattle, Washington D.C. that no longer have public masses, and just today, I learned that Cardinal Supich here in Chicago is following suit. Looks like I'll be going to either Milwaukee, Wisconsin or Indiana this Sunday for Mass. But here in Chicago, that's happening too. The suspension of the holy sacrifice of the Mass. Now I get it that it's being done to try to slow down the spread of this pandemic. I get that, okay? It makes reasonable sense. But like I said, reason has to be illuminated by faith. And that is why it begs me, these things that are happening, it just begs me to question, how far have we, Holy Mother Church, us, the faithful, how far have we disconnected ourselves from the supernatural DNA of our faith? That supernatural DNA of our faith. It really gets me to wonder. In fact, I came across two articles written by a great Catholic thinker, historian, and professor of our days. His name is Professor Robert DiMattei. I'll put a link to these articles below. But Professor Robert DiMattei came out with two really thought-provoking written pieces. Now, the first article is titled Coronavirus and the Church, How One Sainted Pope Handled Plague. It's about the miracle that took place with Pope Gregory the Great during the plague, the plague that swept through Europe and devastated and killed about a third of its population. That's a lot of people. If you think about a third of Europe dying from the plague, that's unbelievable. Yet it happened. But in this article, it talked a miracle that happened during this plague. And like I said, I'll put the link below, but I do want to share something that jumped out at me in this article. But before I do that, I do want to point out that as the plague swept into Rome, the first victim was Pope Gregory's predecessor. The first person in Rome to die was the Pope then, who was at that time Pope Pelagius II. Okay, so now Professor DiMattei shares the account of that miracle. So I'll read part of it here. The Pope exhorted everyone to raise their eyes to God, who permits such tremendous punishments in order to correct his children. To placate the divine wrath, the Pope ordered a 7-form litany. That is, a procession of the entire Roman population, divided into 7 corteges according to sex, age, and condition. The procession moved from the various Roman churches towards the Vatican Basilica, singing litanies along the way. The 7 corteges moved through the buildings of ancient Rome, barefoot, at a slow pace, heads covered in ashes, while the multitude traversed the city in sepulchral silence. The pestilence reached such a point of fury that in the brief space of an hour, 80 people fell down to the ground. However, Gregory didn't cease for a second in exhorting the people to continue praying, and insisted that the picture of the Virgin painted by St. Luke and kept in the Santa Maggiore he brought to the front of the procession. As a holy image advanced, the air became healthier and more limpid, and the miasma of the plague dissolved as if it couldn't stand its presence. It reached the bridge uniting the city to the Hadrian Mausoleum, when all of a sudden a chorus of angels could be heard singing, Regina Caeli, Letare Alleluia, etc., etc. By the way, that's how the Regina Caeli originated. I never knew that. Now the second article is about Saint Borromeo. It's titled, How Saint Charles Borromeo Braved the Epidemic of His Time. Now this took place later after the miracle with Pope Gregory the Great. It happened during an epidemic that killed a third of Milan. And here I want to share what jumped out at me in this article. Again, like I said, the link below will be, see the link below to get the full article. But in it, it says, quote, confusion and fear reigned in Milan, and the Archbishop dedicated himself completely to assisting the sick and ordering public and private prayers. Dom Prosper Gironde sums up his infinite charity in this way. So here he's talking about St. Borromeo. He says, quote, in the absence of local authorities, he organized the health service, founded or renewed hospitals, sought money and provisions, decreed preventive measures. Most importantly, though, he took steps to ensure spiritual help, assistance to the sick, and the burial of the dead. Unafraid of being infected, he paid in person by visiting hospitals, leading penitential processions, etc. It goes on to say, he rebuked the civil authorities for having placed their trust in human measures rather than divine ones. You know, it goes on to mention that he had 3 public processions and erected 20 columns with the crucifix on the top so that the faithful can participate in public masses from their windows. You know, taking these 2 accounts into consideration, I can't help but wonder and question how the church is reacting to this COVID-19 coronavirus. You know, again, are we becoming so disconnected to our Catholic roots that we are losing touch with the supernatural DNA of our Catholic faith? Is this what is happening? You know, it appears so to me. You know, too many of us are more concerned about obtaining hand sanitizers rather than soul sanitizers. You know, what I mean by that is like holy water. That's what I mean by soul sanitizers. Get it? Holy water. More people are worried about obtaining disinfecting wipes rather than being concerned about wiping our souls of our sins through penance. More people are more concerned about having to sacrifice now. You know, not being able to do things, sacrificing this, sacrificing that. More people are more worried about their personal sacrifices than the most important sacrifice, the holy sacrifice of the Mass, the sacrifice that Jesus Christ gave for us. You know, these are sad times. These are sad times. Look, I know I'm just a fart in the wind, okay? But I am begging and imploring all of you priests out there, all of you priests and prelates, not to become part of this, what seems to be, I've heard it called, a church of abandonment. Don't be part of that, okay? We don't need the church of abandonment. And you know what? We don't even need a church of accompaniment either. What I need, what we need, and I hope I'm echoing the same sentiments of many Catholics out there right now. What we need from Holy Mother Church are leaders, like the priests, the bishop and the priests in Poland, who are asking for, are calling out for more masses at this time. Like the bishop in Texas, Bishop Strickland, who did a procession. Okay, we need more leaders. Now, in addition to all you priests out there, I want to also put out a call out to all of you traditional Latin Mass priests out there, all of you priests out there who celebrate the traditional Latin Mass, whether you're a diocesan, whether you're a Fraternal Society St. Peter priest, whether you're an Institute of Christ the King Sovereign priest, whether you're a Society of St. Pius X, whether you're a Canons Regular of St. John Cantius, whatever kind of priest you are, if you're a priest out there who celebrates the traditional Latin Mass, please, you know the efficacy of the traditional Latin Mass. You know it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be embracing it. You know how it can bear more merit, more extrinsic merit than the today's Mass, the Novus Ordo Mass. You know that. And just in case some of the viewers out there are wondering what I'm talking about, I'll put a link below too, explaining about the merits of the Mass, specifically the traditional Latin Mass. But back to you priests and prelates who celebrate the traditional Latin Mass. Please, pull out the big guns and attack this COVID-19 coronavirus head on. Attack it head on through the Mass, through the most holy sacrifice of the Mass, through the traditional Latin Mass. Okay, do what you need to do to cooperate and try to help minimize the spread of this. Yeah, I don't know what that is. I've heard maybe it's having more frequent masses with less people so that it's not so crowded. Maybe it's having masses outdoors, okay? I don't know, but whatever, please think of ways that you can still offer us faithful the most holy sacrifice of the Mass. This is not the time to abandon the Mass, to not partake in the highest form of prayer. This is not the time. And this is why reason can trick us into saying, yes, this is the time. But that's why we need faith. We need the traditional faith of all the saints in the past, of Pope Gregory the Great, of St. Borromeo, of so many other saints. We need that kind of faith. And we need you, priests out there, to lead us with that. Please. With what's happening, I know a lot of you priests out there have got your hands tied, because if, like here in Chicago, I can't go to St. John Cantius for the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass. I can't go to the Institute of Christ the King. Okay? Why? Because they're obedient to the bishop. And obedience is good. Okay? Obedience is good. So for those out there who are being obedient and don't dismiss the efficacy of the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass, if you can't offer it publicly, please be more fervent in offering offering it up in your private masses. I know you, at least I hope, all of you priests out there who celebrate the traditional last Mass are still continuously, daily doing your private Masses. You know, the Sine Populo Mass, the Mass without a congregation, the Mass that you do with just a server. We need that. You know the efficacy of those Masses. Many of you know how St. Bellarmine defended the Mass, the private Masses, and went through such great extent to defend it, because, you know, who hated it most was Luther, you know. So you know the importance of the private Mass. So please, in your private Mass, don't forget, do those Masses. You know, I open up my missal, and in both my 1962 missal and my Father Lassant's missal, I opened it up just out of wondering how the church in the past dealt with plagues and pestilence and famines or disease and things like that. And you know what? I found there in both missals a Mass for pestilence. I don't know if, I'm sure you priests know that, but me, I saw that. And I'm like, hey, how wonderful is the old rite? You know, I couldn't find a Mass in the new missal, the Novus Ordo missal. Not that I go to that Mass anymore, but I, had to find out. I did buy that missal long time ago. I never used it, but there's no Mass in there for the Novus Ordo. For they like many things, they got rid of that too. But hey, look, it is there. I was looking at that Mass, and in the when I looked at that, this is the Father Lassant's missal, and I was looking at the Mass in the time of pestilence, and I looked at the introit. The introit prayer is very, my goodness, it reads, "Be mindful, O Lord, of thy covenant, and say to the destroying angel, now hold thy hand, and let not the land be made desolate, and destroy not every living soul. Give ear, O thou that rulest Israel, thou that leadest Joseph like a sheep." I mean, this is a Mass that should be said. At least that's what I think. Now, I don't know how this works. I don't know if you could just pull out this Mass and say this Mass at your will, and at any time, or if you need to have specific Masses that you do in your daily Masses, your private Masses. I mean, my goodness, if you can, what an arsenal this is in attacking this COVID-19 coronavirus. A specific Mass, and this is the COVID-19 coronavirus is a pestilence. Okay, it is a pestilence. So, in closing, I want to leave you with this. Okay, it's not just the priests that should be watching this, but we all should. I want to leave you with something. It's a story. It's part of a sermon that was done this past Sunday by a Father Jonathan Meyer. It's a powerful story, and as you're watching it, just think about the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. I want you to think about the holy sacrifice of the Mass. Okay, like I said, we need leaders.
Okay, so I had a homily planned for this weekend, but then when I got this email, I decided to change my homily. Why? Well, because ever since the outbreak of the coronavirus, I've been having these flashbacks of sorts to Rediscover Catholicism and the prologue in Rediscover Catholicism. And so I was like, well, if I'm just going to like throw all this coronavirus stuff out at all of you and precautions, like I'm just going to go ahead and read this because I keep going back to this, which is actually really good because it's a powerful, powerful, powerful story. I read this on Good Friday like 3 or 4 years ago for my Good Friday homily. So I'm going to read this today. Some of you have heard this story before, but it's a powerful one. I think it's a powerful one for right now. Because a lot of you, if you haven't heard this story, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, that's like what's happening right now. So here we go. Imagine this. You're driving home from work next Monday after a long day. You turn on your radio and you hear a brief report about a small village in India where some people have suddenly died, strangely, of a flu that's never been heard of before. It's not influenza, but 4 people are dead. So the Centers for Disease Control are sending doctors to India to investigate. You don't think much about it. People die every day. But coming home from church the following Sunday, you hear another report on the radio. Only now, it's not 4 people who have died, but 30,000 people who have died in the back hills of India. Whole villages are being wiped out, and experts confirm that this flu is a strain that has never been seen before. By the time you get up on Monday morning, it's the lead story. The disease is spreading. Now it's not just in India that's affected. Now it's spreading to Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, and northern Africa. But it still seems far away. Before you know it, you're hearing the story everywhere. The media has now coined it the mystery flu. The president has announced that he and his family are praying for the victims and their families and are hoping for the situation to be resolved quickly. But everybody's wondering, how will they contain it? That's when the president of France makes an announcement that shocks all of Europe. He's closing the French borders. No one can enter the country. And that's why that night while you're watching the news, before going to bed, your jaw hits your chest when a weeping woman's words are translated from English into from a French news program. There's a man lying in a hospital in Paris dying of the mystery flu. It has come to Europe. Panic strikes. As best as one can tell, after contracting the disease, you have it for a week before you know it, then you have 4 days of unbelievable symptoms, and then you die. The British close their borders, but it's too late. The disease breaks out in Southampton, Liverpool, and London, and on Tuesday morning, the President of the United States makes the following announcement. Due to the national security risk, all flights to and from the United States have been canceled. If your loved ones are overseas, I'm sorry. They cannot come home until we find a cure for this horrific disease. Within 4 days, America is plunged into an unbelievable fear. People are wondering, what if it comes to this country? Preachers on television are saying it's the scourge of God. Then on Tuesday night, you're at church for a Bible study when someone runs in from the parking lot and says, turn on the radio. And while everyone listens to a small radio, the announcement is made. 2 women are lying in a hospital in New York, dying of the mystery flu. It has come to America. Within hours, the disease envelops the country. People are working around the clock trying to find an antidote, but nothing is working. The disease breaks out in California, Oregon, Arizona, Florida, Massachusetts. It's as though it's just sweeping across the borders. Then suddenly the news comes out. A code has been broken. A cure can be found. A vaccine can be made. I'm going to take the blood of somebody who hasn't been infected. So you and I are asked to do just one thing: go to the nearest hospital and have your blood tested. When you hear the siren go off in your neighborhood, you are to make your way quickly, quietly, and safely to the hospital. Sure enough, by the time you and your family get to the hospital, it's late Friday night. There's long lines of people and a constant rush of doctors and nurses taking blood and putting labels on it. Finally, it's your turn. You go first, then your spouse and your children follow. And once the doctors have taken your blood, they say to you, "Wait here in the parking lot for your name to be called." You stand around with your family and neighbors, scared, waiting, and wondering quietly to yourself, what on earth is going on? Is this the end of the world? How did we ever come to this? Nobody seems to have their name called. The doctors just keep taking people's blood. But then suddenly a young man comes running out of the hospital, screaming. He's yelling a name with a clipboard in his hand. You don't hear him at first. What's he saying? Someone asks. The young man screams the name again, and he and his team of medical staff runs in your direction. But again, you can't hear him. But then your son tugs at your jacket and says, "Daddy, that's me. That's my name they're calling." Before you know it, they've grabbed your boy. Wait a minute, hold on. You say to them, running after them, "That's my son." "It's okay," they reply. "We think he has the right blood type. We just need to check one more time to make sure that he doesn't have the disease." 5 tense minutes later, out come the doctors and nurses, crying and hugging each other. Some of them are even laughing. This is the first time you've seen anybody laugh in over a week. An old doctor walks up to you and your spouse and says, "Thank you. Your son's blood is perfect. It's clean. It's pure. It doesn't have the disease. And we can use it to make the vaccine." As the news begins to spread across the parking lot, people are screaming. People are praying. They're laughing. They're crying. You can hear the crowd erupting in the background as the gray-haired doctor pulls you and your spouse aside and says, "I need to talk to you. We didn't realize that the donor would be a minor, and we need to have you sign a consent form." The doctor presents the form, and you quickly begin to sign it, but then your eye catches something on the form. The box for the number of pints of blood to be taken is empty. "How many pints?" you ask. That's when the doctor's smile fades, and he says, "We had no idea it would be a child. We weren't prepared for this." You ask him again, "How many pints?" The old doctor looks away and says regretfully, "We're going to need it all. We need all of it." "But I don't understand. What do you mean you need all of it? He's my only son." The doctor grabs you by the shoulders, pulls you close, looks you straight into the eyes and says, "We're talking about the whole world here. Do you not understand? The whole world. Please sign the form. We need to hurry. People are dying." "But can't you give him a transfusion, you plead?" "If we had clean blood, we would, but we don't. Please, sign the form." What would you do? In numb silence, you sign the form because it's the only thing to do. Then the doctor says to you, "Would you like to have a moment with your son before we get started?" Could you walk into the hospital room where your son sits on a table saying, "Daddy, Mommy, what's going on?" Could you tell your son that you love him? When the doctors and the nurses come back in and say, "I'm sorry, we've got to get started now. People all over the world are dying." Could you leave? Could you walk away? Could you turn away from your son who is crying out to you, Mom, Dad, what's going on? Where are you going? Why are you leaving? Why are you abandoning me? The following week, they hold a ceremony to honor your son for his phenomenal contribution to humanity. But some people sleep through it. Others don't even bother to come because they have better things to do. And some people come with a pretentious smile and pretend to care, while others sit around and say, this ceremony is boring. Wouldn't you want to stand up and say, excuse me, I'm not sure if you're aware of it or not, but the amazing life that you have, my son died that you could have this life. My son died so that you could live. He died for you. Does it mean something to you? Perhaps that's what God wants to say to us. Our world is living right now in fear of death. And yet we are a people who profess and proclaim that the Son of God died so that we might not have fear, but that we might have life. We are a people who boldly believe that the death of the Son of God gave us eternal life, so that death would be no more. At this Mass, we come forward to receive the body and blood of Jesus, the blood that he shed for us on the cross, so that as he says to us, he who eats my flesh and drinks my blood has eternal life. My dear brothers and sisters, I don't have the antidote. I don't have the cure. But I do know that those who believe in Jesus and those who follow his way, no matter how they die, by the coronavirus, by old age, by AIDS, by cancer, by a tumor in their head, by a car accident, that they don't really die. And we have nothing to fear. We as Christians are called to love, and we're called to live differently than the rest of the world. May we do so with faith and confidence and trust. Amen.
Hey, this is Rex. If you like this video, please give me a thumbs up, hit the like button, and subscribe. And don't forget to hit the bell button too so you get notified on future episodes. So until next time, God bless you.